I found my ex-wife hiding in the back of my truck outside the co-op in Marlow, Montana, on a cold Tuesday in October. Curled into the wheel well under a tarp, next to the toolbox she bought me for Christmas 9 years ago, wearing a wedding dress with mud dried to the knee. 4 years since June Ballard signed the papers. 4 years of a phone that didn't ring, a house my grandfather built for 2 people, and one text I typed in 2022 and never sent. I'm Wade Ballard, 38, 300 acres, 400 head, and a truck with a cracked tail light I never fixed because she's the one who broke it. Backing into the corral gate the last spring we were happy. I came into town for fence wire, that's all. But my ex-wife was in the bed of my truck with her shoes in her hands and blood dried on one heel, going still the way she always did when she was terrified and refusing to let it show. Like stillness was somewhere a person could hide. And out on Main, a white pickup sat idling at the four-way with its flashers on, blocking both lanes, in no particular hurry at all. Because when your family owns the bank in a county this size, you don't have to hurry, you just wait for the road to give her back. Her phone was gone. Smashed in a parking lot 40 miles behind her, she told me later, so nobody could follow the little blue dot. She sat up under the tarp and looked at me, the way you look at the last door in a burning room. Wade. It barely got out of her. Pretend I'm your wife, just until we're out of town. My ex-wife, in the back of my truck, asking me to pretend to be the one thing she went to a courthouse to stop being. Now before we go 1 mile further down that road, here's what I need you to sit with. Why was June Ballard hiding in the back of my truck in a wedding dress that had nothing to do with me? Who was she supposed to be marrying at 11 o'clock that morning? And what did he stand to lose if she didn't show? Why say pretend when she was still wearing my ring on a chain under that dress 4 years after she gave it back? And the question I'd carried across every fence line on that place for 4 years, the one I couldn't make myself ask her yet. If she stopped loving me, why is her name still Ballard? She asked me to pretend, but nothing that happened after I closed that tailgate was pretend. Not 1 minute of it. I want to tell you I thought about it. I didn't. 4 years of not thinking about her, and my body made the decision before my head got a vote. I dropped the tailgate the rest of the way down and held out my hand. Come up front. She stared at my hand like it was a trick. Wade, if they see me, they're going to see you a lot faster if you're riding in the bed of a truck under a tarp in October. I kept my voice flat. Ranch voice. The one I use on green horses and scared calves. In the cab, you're just a woman in a passenger seat. Come on. She took my hand. It was ice cold. There was a tremor running through it that she couldn't shut off no matter how still the rest of her went. And when she stepped down onto the gravel with those shoes still hanging from 2 fingers, she made a sound in her throat. She tried to swallow. I looked down. The heel of her right foot was split open, packed with dirt and gravel dust. She'd walked, not a little, a lot. How far? Doesn't matter. June. 6 miles. Maybe 7. She said it like she was reading a grocery list. There was a fence. Barbed. I went under it wrong. 7 miles. Barefoot. In a wedding dress. I put her in the cab and shut the door, and walked around the front of that truck, slower than I have ever walked anywhere in my life, because I needed the 4 seconds to get my face right. The dress was ivory, not white. Ivory with little seed pearls at the collar that caught the light, and mud up to the knee. And a tear on the left side where something had grabbed it, and she'd kept going anyway. Somebody had spent real money on that dress. And somebody was out on Main Street right now, idling at a 4-way with his flashers on, waiting to get it back. I got in, started the engine, put both hands on the wheel, and did not look at her. Head down. Not all the way. Just like you're looking at your phone. I don't have a phone. Then look like you're looking at a phone you don't have. I heard something come out of her that was almost a laugh, and it broke in the middle, and she pressed her hand over her mouth to stop the rest of it. I pulled out of the co-op lot. Marlow is 4 blocks long. That's it. 4 blocks, 1 light that blinks yellow after 8, a grain elevator, a school with 81 kids in it, and a bank on the corner with a name carved into the stone above the door. Callaway. I drove toward that white pickup at exactly 25 miles an hour, because 26 would have been a confession. It was a new Silverado, the kind that costs more than my first house. and there were two of them standing beside it. One I didn't know, the other one I did. Del Reese, who ran cattle for the Callaway operation and had been 2 years behind me in school, and who had once, at 17, let the air out of my tires because I took a girl he liked to a dance. Del stepped out into the road with his hand up. June went absolutely still beside me. Not scared still, gone still. Like she'd left her body somewhere behind us on the highway and only the shell was riding along. I rolled the window down. The cold came in, and with it the smell of diesel and wet gravel and somebody burning slash somewhere out east. "Wade," Del said. "Del, you seen a woman on the road? Dark hair? She'd be—" He stopped. His eyes went past me, into the cab, onto her, and I watched him do the math. I want you to understand something about small towns. In a place like Marlow, everybody knows everything. They know what your grandfather paid for his land in 1961. They know your mother's maiden name. They know your marriage ended, and they know the year, and they know that neither of you ever said one bad word about the other, which was somehow the strangest part of it to them, because folks can forgive a scandal a lot easier than they can forgive a mystery. Del Reese knew exactly who was sitting in my truck. "That's June," he said. "That's my wife," I said. "I don't know where it came from. It came out of me the way your hand comes off a hot stove. Before thought, before permission, in the flat, bored, slightly annoyed voice of a man being kept from his own supper." Del blinked. "Y'all are divorced. You go to the wedding?" I said. "What? The divorce? Was there a ceremony? Did I miss the reception?" I let a little bite into it. "Del, it's 40 degrees, and I've got 120 head that don't feed themselves. What do you want? And here's the thing. Here's the thing about a lie that isn't quite a lie. Her name was still Ballard. On her driver's license, on her insurance, on the mailbox at the end of a road she hadn't driven down in 4 years. She had never changed it back, and I had never asked why. And Del Reese did not have one single document in the world that said otherwise." He looked at her again. "June," he said, "Mr. Callaway's real worried about you." She turned her head and looked at him. "And I swear to you, something came up out of that woman that I had not seen in 4 years. Her chin came up. Her voice came out steady as a fence post. Tell him I said the flowers were beautiful." Del's mouth opened. Nothing came out of it. I put the truck in gear and rolled forward, slow, not fast, and Del had to step back or get his boots run over. And in the mirror, I watched him standing in the middle of Main Street, with his phone already coming up out of his pocket. 4 blocks. That's all Marlow is. 4 blocks and then the town just quits, and the land opens up like somebody pulled a sheet off it, and there's nothing in front of you but road and grass and the bighorns sitting blue and cold way off to the west with the first snow already on their shoulders. I got half a mile out before she made a sound. It wasn't crying. I want to be clear about that. June Ballard did not cry in front of people. Her mother taught her that, and life confirmed it. And in 9 years of marriage I saw her cry exactly twice. It was a shaking. Her whole body, all at once, like a fever breaking. She wrapped her arms around herself and bent forward until her forehead nearly touched the dash, and the shaking went through her in waves, and she made no noise at all. I pulled over. I didn't touch her. 4 years earns you a rule, and the rule is you don't touch somebody who hasn't said you can. I just put it in park and sat there with the engine running and the heater blowing and the whole enormous empty afternoon around us, and I waited. It took about 90 seconds. Then she sat up and pushed her hair back and let out a breath. "Okay," she said. "Okay. I'm okay. I didn't ask." She looked over at me for the first time in the daylight. Straight on. No tarp between us. No glass. No 4 years of nothing. Her face had changed. I don't mean older. Everybody gets older. I mean the specific way a face changes when a person has spent a long stretch carrying something they can't put down. Thinner through the cheeks. A line between her eyebrows that used to only show up when she was doing the books, that now just lived there. "You said wife," she said. "You told me to. You didn't have to say it like you meant it." I looked out the windshield at 300 miles of Montana. "Drive," she said quietly. "Please, just drive." So I drove. Now here's what I knew in that truck, and here's what I didn't, and I need you to have both of them in your hands before we go any further. Because if you don't understand why we got divorced, None of the rest of this will land the way it should. Everybody in Marlowe had a theory about us. The theory was that Wade Ballard was a hard man who wouldn't leave his land, and June was a town girl who got tired of the wind and the winter and the 200 miles to anything that mattered. That's the theory people like, because it's simple, and because it lets them feel like they'd have done it better. I've heard people say it in the feed line. I've heard it at the elevator. I heard a woman say it at my own father's funeral, 3 feet behind me, in the voice folks use when they think grief makes you deaf. They were wrong. Here's what actually happened. June's mother was named Delia. She was a school secretary in Marlowe for 31 years, and she knew every kid in that building by name, and she kept a jar of butterscotch in her desk drawer that generations of 8-year-olds knew about like it was a state secret. When June was 31, Delia started forgetting the butterscotch. Then she forgot which drawer. Then she forgot the kids. We kept her at the ranch as long as we could. 2 years and 4 months. I built a ramp. June installed locks on the outside of the doors that she cried about installing. One of the 2 times I ever saw it. We took shifts. I'd come in off a 14-hour day and take the night so June could sleep. And June would take the day so I could work. And somewhere in there we stopped being 2 people who were married and became 2 people running a facility. And then Delia walked out at 2 in the morning in January, in a nightgown, and I found her 40 minutes later standing in the creek bed in 11 degrees, asking me if I'd seen her husband, who'd been dead 19 years. The doctor didn't ask us anymore. He told us. There was one memory care place we could get her into within 4 hours of Marlowe. 1. Willow Bend, out past Billings, private facility, nice carpet, piano in the lobby that nobody played. June drove her mother down on a Thursday. And here is the moment. Right here. This is the moment the entire rest of my life turned on. And I wasn't even in the room for it. And I'll carry that until they put me in the ground. They put Delia in a chair by the window with a cup of apple juice. And they took June into an office and set a stack of paper in front of her, about an inch thick. And the admissions director, a pleasant woman with reading glasses on a beaded chain, flipped to the tabs and said, "Sign here, and initial here." Down the hall, Delia started calling for her daughter. You have to understand what that sounds like. Not crying, calling. The way a child does in a store when they turn around and you're not there. That specific pitch of a human being who has lost their one landmark in the world. June signed. She signed 41 pages in about 9 minutes, with her mother's voice coming down that hallway. And one of those pages had a paragraph on it. And that paragraph made June Ballard, personally, individually, and without limitation, responsible for every dollar of her mother's care if her mother's money ever ran out. Not Delia. June. Her signature, her name, her neck. And she never read it, because a woman was calling for her down a hallway, and there is not a person listening to this who would have read it either. Delia lived 2 more years. The money lasted 22 months. I'll never forget the number, because I've seen it on paper more times than I've seen my own birthday. $141,680. And climbing, because the interest ran, and the facility had a collections attorney in Billings who did nothing else all day. We sat in a lawyer's office in Sheridan, both of us. That's the part nobody in Marlowe ever knew. That we went together, that we tried, that we sat in front of 3 different people over 11 months looking for a door. The lawyer was maybe 60. He had a picture of a boat on his wall that I stared at for a long time. And he laid it out plain, the way you'd want a doctor to. That debt was hers, personally. And under Montana law, a creditor with a judgment against a married person can come after the property that couple holds together. Our operating account, our equipment, our cattle, and the land. 300 acres my grandfather bought in 1961 with money he made shoeing horses that my father was born on, that has a hill on the north end with 4 Ballards buried on it, one of them 11 years old. I said we'd sell cattle. He said it wasn't enough. I said we'd take a loan. He asked me which bank. And I sat there in that chair and heard myself say the name out loud like an idiot, because in that county there is only one. Callaway. We drove home in the dark that night and didn't say anything for 80 miles. Then June said, real quiet, "There's one thing he didn't say." I said, "Don't." She said, "If I'm not your wife, they can't touch your land." I said, "Don't." She said, "Wade." and I pulled that truck over on the shoulder of Highway 14, with the hazards going, and I said no. I said it maybe 40 times. I said it loud enough that my throat hurt the next morning. I told her the land was just dirt. I told her I'd sell every head and lease the grass and go weld in the Bakken for 6 years if that's what it took. And she let me finish. And then she said the sentence I've never gotten out from under. It's not just dirt to you. And I'm not going to be the reason your grandfather's name comes off it. I signed it. Wade, me, my hand. And I'm not putting that on you. She filed in March. I want that on the record, since half the county thinks they know. She filed. Not me. I fought it. I lost. Because you can't fight somebody who's protecting you. Every argument you make just proves their point. Our lawyer said the split had to be clean, or a court would call it a fraud. Nothing joint. Separate accounts. Separate addresses on file. And she had to sign away any interest in the ranch. In writing. Notarized. So no creditor could ever reach it through her. The quitclaim. She sat at that table in Sheridan on a Tuesday, and the lawyer slid the paper across, and June picked up the pen, and she stopped. And she looked up at me. I have gone over those 4 seconds 10,000 times. On a tractor. On a fence line. At 2 in the morning with the ceiling doing nothing. She was waiting for me to say it. Just one thing. Just, you don't have to sign that, June. Just, I'd rather lose the whole thing than do this. It wouldn't have changed the outcome. She'd have signed anyway. She's the most stubborn human being God ever assembled. But she was waiting. And I didn't say it. Because I thought she knew. Because I thought a thing that obvious didn't need saying out loud in front of a lawyer and a notary. Because I was 34 and scared out of my mind, and I had decided somewhere in my chest that if I opened my mouth right then, I was going to come apart in that office. And Ballard men don't come apart in offices. So I sat there with my jaw set like a fool and let her think it was easy for me. She signed her name. June Delia Ballard, in that handwriting that leans hard to the right. And she set the pen down and looked at the paper, and something went out of her face that I have not seen come back since. Because in that second, she understood, or thought she did, that she was the only one of us treating it as pretend. The decree came through in June. She moved to Sheridan and then to Buffalo, and took a job doing books for an equipment dealer, and paid that facility $300 a month against $141,000, which, if you do the arithmetic, is not a payment plan, it's a life sentence. Delia died the following spring. I found out from the paper. I drove to the funeral and stood at the back and left before the last hymn, because I didn't know if I was allowed to be there, and because I was afraid of what would happen if she turned around and saw me. That's the text I typed in 2022. Standing in the parking lot of a church in Buffalo, Montana, with my truck door open and the engine running. I'm here. I'm outside. Tell me where to stand. I never sent it. 4 years. And now she was sitting 18 inches from me, in a wedding dress with somebody else's seed pearls on the collar, and there was blood in her shoe, and I still didn't know what I'd done wrong until I asked. We were maybe 20 miles out. The road had started to climb, and the cottonwoods along the creek were that hard gold they get for about 9 days in October, before the wind takes all of it at once. She spoke first. You're going to want to know. I want you to eat something and get that foot cleaned out. The rest can wait. It can't wait. She turned in the seat to face me. Wade, in about 2 hours, somebody's going to tell Roy Calloway that Del Reese saw me in your truck. And when that happens, you need to already know what you're standing in the middle of. You don't get to find out after. There it was. Roy Calloway. 62 years old. Owns the bank. 4,000 acres. The equipment dealership in Buffalo where she kept the books. And a seat on more boards than there are streets in Marlow. You were marrying Roy Calloway, I said. This morning. 11 o'clock. 91 people at the Grace Fellowship in Sheridan. Her voice was flat as a table. I made it to 8 minutes before the processional, and then I went out the side door by the kitchen and I ran. I kept my eyes on the road. It took some doing. June. Ask it. Why him? And she was quiet for so long that the tires filled up the whole cab. Then she said, because 11 months ago he bought my debt. I looked over at her. He bought it, she said again. The facility sold the paper. It happens, Wade. They sell delinquent accounts all the time. It's not even unusual. Except it wasn't a collections agency in Denver that bought mine. She looked out the window. It was a man I'd worked for. 4 days a week. For 3 years. Who knew my number down to the dollar? Who called me into his office and slid a folder across the desk and told me my problem was solved. My hands were tight enough on that wheel to hurt. And what did he want? At first, nothing. She laughed, and there was no humor anywhere in it. That's how it works. That's exactly how it works. First it's nothing. Then it's dinner, because we're friends. Then it's a car, because mine died, and I'd be doing him a favor driving the demo. Then it's a house, because the apartment isn't safe, and he's got one sitting empty. June. And every single time I said no, he'd smile and say, "June, that account's not going anywhere. I'm the most patient man in this county." The cab was so quiet, I could hear the heater ticking. "He never once threatened me," she said. "Not one time. Not in 11 months. He never had to. Because he owned the paper, and the paper had my name on it. And both of us knew he could file on it any Tuesday he felt like." She reached up and pulled a chain out from under the collar of that dress. And there it was. Thin gold band. Nothing fancy. I paid $410 for it in billings when I was 28 years old, and had exactly $430 in the account. She held it in her fist. 2 weeks ago he proposed. In front of people, at the dealership Christmas party they hold early because of hunting season. Everybody clapping. Her jaw tightened. And afterward, he put his hand on my back and said into my ear, real warm, real kind, "Now, we're going to have to do something about that name." I didn't say anything. "Ballard," she said. He wanted me to change it. That was the wedding gift. That's the only thing he ever actually asked me for. And that's when I understood I was not driving away from a wedding. I was driving away from a purchase. "Wade." Her voice changed. Went smaller. "There's one more thing, and I need you to pull over before I say it, because you're going to want to be stopped." I pulled over. Gravel. Engine ticking. That enormous cold Montana silence pressing in on the glass from every direction. She reached down into the bodice of that dress and pulled out a folded envelope, warm from her skin, worn soft at the creases, like something that had been opened and reread 100 times. "3 weeks ago I was pulling old files at the dealership," she said, "and I found the assignment paperwork, the purchase of my account, and Wade." She stopped. Her hands were shaking so hard the envelope rattled. "The date on it is wrong." "Wrong how?" "He bought my debt 11 months ago. That's what he told me. That's what he told everybody." She looked up at me, and her eyes were enormous. "The signature on this assignment is dated 4 years ago, 3 weeks before I filed." The world went very quiet. "June," I said. "Say that again." "He owned it before the divorce, Wade." Her voice cracked straight down the middle. "He had it the whole time. He sat in that bank and watched me tear my own life apart to keep his collateral away from your land. And he never said one word." I read that envelope 4 times, sitting on the shoulder of Highway 14, with the hazards clicking. It was 3 pages, dry as dust. The kind of paper that decides a human life while sounding like a receipt for gravel. Assignment of account. Willow Bend Care Community LLC. Assignor. Callaway Holdings LLC. Assignee. Account. Ballard, June D. And down at the bottom, above 2 signatures and a notary stamp from a woman in Sheridan, whose name I'd seen on my own tax paperwork. A date. March. 4 years back. 3 weeks before June walked into a courthouse and gave up her name, her house, and me. I set it on the dash. I put both hands on the wheel, and I sat there, while the whole architecture of the last 4 years came apart behind my eyes and reassembled itself into something uglier. Wade. "He was in the bank," I said. "Yes, he was in the bank the whole time. We came to him. We sat in his office in—" I stopped. I had to stop. "June. We came to him for a loan. In April. Both of us. We sat across the desk from that man and told him everything. The debt, the number, what the lawyer said. I know. He turned us down for $140,000. My voice was doing something I didn't recognize. He said the operation didn't cash flow. He said he was sorry. He walked us out to the parking lot with his hand on my shoulder and told me my grandfather was a good man. I know, Wade. He already owned it. Yes. He'd owned it for a month. Yes. I looked out the windshield. Everything out there was exactly the same. Grass going tan. Fence line running off to nothing. A hawk sitting on a post about a quarter-mile up with that patient, terrible calm they have. And I understood, sitting there, that a man had watched two people he'd known his entire life dismantle a marriage in order to protect land from a debt that he was holding in a drawer. And he'd made a decision every single day for 4 years not to speak. That's not greed. Greed is loud. Greed grabs. That's patience. And patience is worse, because patience means you thought about it. Every morning, over coffee, and chose it again. Why? I said. Just tell me why. June pulled her knees up onto the seat. That dress spilled off the edge of it like something out of a magazine, and there was blood on her heel, and it was, I think, the single strangest sight of my life. Because he wanted me clear, she said. Clear. Wade, think about it. She turned toward me. If he calls that note while I'm married to you, he gets a fight. He gets your lawyer, and your name in this county, and a jury of people who've known the Ballards for 60 years, and he takes your land in public where everybody can watch him do it. She was talking fast now. But if I'm divorced, if I'm single, and broke, and alone, and I've already signed away every claim to anything, then you're just a woman with a number on her. Then I'm a woman with a number on her. She looked down at her hands. He didn't want the ranch, Wade. He never wanted the ranch. And there it was, sitting in the cab with us. He wanted you out of it, I said. She didn't answer. She didn't have to. Because I was already back in that lawyer's office in Sheridan, watching her pick up a pen and look up at me, waiting for me to say one sentence. And I finally understood that the silence in that room hadn't just cost us 4 years. It had been engineered. Somebody had built the room. Somebody had built the pen and the paper and the 4 seconds and the reason she had to hold it together. And then that somebody had gone home and had supper. I started the truck. Where are we going? She said. Home. She went very still. Wade, if Dell already called. He called before we cleared the 4-way. I pulled out onto the highway. There's no version of today where Roy Calloway doesn't know exactly where you are by dark. So we're not hiding you. We're putting you somewhere with a locked gate, 40 miles of my ground between you and the road, and a man in the house who's had about all he intends to take. I felt her looking at me. That's not a plan, she said. No, I said. It's a position. Plans come later. 41 miles out of Marlow, the county road quits pretending and turns to gravel, and then 11 miles after that, it stops being county at all and becomes mine. There's a cattle guard and a gate my father hung in 1988. And past that the road drops into the creek bottom and comes up the other side onto a bench where the house sits with its back to the north wind. June didn't say anything the whole way. But when the house came into view, white, 2-story, steep roof, the porch running the full front, she made a small sound and put her hand flat against the passenger window. 4 years. She hadn't seen it in 4 years. I parked. I came around and opened her door. I can walk. You can't. And we both know it. And there's nobody out here to see it. So let's not spend 10 minutes on it. She looked at me for a second. Then she put her arm around my neck and let me carry her up the porch steps of a house she'd signed away, in a wedding dress, bought by another man. And I want to tell you, I was thinking something noble. I wasn't. I was thinking, she still smells like the same shampoo. 9 years and 4 years and a whole other life. And the woman still buys the green bottle. It's the stupid things that take your legs out from under you. I put her on the bench in the mudroom and got the first aid box and a basin and knelt down on that floor and took her foot in my hand. The cut ran 3 inches across her heel, deep enough that it should have had stitches 8 hours ago, packed with dirt and grass seed and one small pearl of gravel that had worked its way in and stayed. This is going to hurt. I know. I'm not going to be fast about it. Fast makes it worse. Wade, she said it quiet. Just do it. So I cleaned my ex-wife's foot on the floor of my mudroom while the light went orange out the window, and neither one of us said a word for 11 minutes, and she didn't make one sound. Not one. And when I finally got the gravel out and looked up, she was staring at the ceiling with her eyes wide open and tears running straight down into her hair. Not from the foot. I knew better than to say anything. I wrapped it. I taped it. I sat back on my heels. There's clothes upstairs. I said. Second drawer. In the... I stopped. In the blue dresser, she said. Yeah, you kept my clothes. I kept the dresser, I said. The clothes were in it. She looked at me for a long moment. Wade Ballard, she said, you are the worst liar I have ever met in my life. And she got up on that bad foot and went up the stairs of my house holding the banister. And I sat on the floor of the mudroom next to a basin of pink water and put my hands over my face. Here's what the next 6 weeks looked like. And I'm going to tell it to you straight, because the truth is better than anything I could invent. Nothing happened. That's the part people don't believe. Nothing happened, and it was the most important 6 weeks of my life. The rain came Thursday night, 3 inches in 11 hours, which in October in that country is not weather. It's an event. And Friday morning I drove down to the creek crossing and got out and stood there looking at where the road used to be. Gone. 40 feet of it. Down to bedrock. Water still running brown and fast across the gap. I came back up to the house, and June was on the porch with coffee, in my jacket and a pair of sweatpants, and she read it off my face before I got out of the truck. How bad? Culvert's 100 yards downstream. County'll get to it. When? They've got 60 miles of road doing the same thing and 4 trucks. I came up the steps. 6 weeks, maybe 8. She stood there holding that mug with both hands. So I'm stuck here. You're stuck here. And I watched her face do something complicated. Fear and relief fighting it out. And then settle. Okay, she said. Then she went in the house and, without saying one word about it, started fixing things. I found the first one on day 3. The kitchen faucet had dripped for 2 years. Not badly. Just a tick every 11 seconds that I'd stopped hearing sometime in the second winter. I came in for lunch, and it was silent. And it took me a full minute standing there in my own kitchen to work out what was wrong. There was a washer set out on the windowsill. The old one. Split clean through. She never mentioned it. Day 9. The drawer in the hall that hadn't opened right since before the divorce, because the runner had come loose, and I'd been meaning to get to it. Slid like it was on ice. Day 14. The third porch step. The one you had to step over. That everybody who came to my house learned about the hard way. Solid. New wood, weathered to match with something. She never told me how she matched it. To this day I don't know. Day 19. I came in off the north pasture at dark, and the whole house smelled like bread. Not store bread. The real thing. Delia's. The one from the recipe card with the corner torn off. And I stood in the doorway with my hat in my hand, like a man who'd walked into the wrong life. And here's the thing that broke me. And it's so small you might miss it. She never once said, I did that. Not one time in 6 weeks. She never pointed at a single thing she fixed. Never fished for it. Never left it half done so I'd notice. I just kept walking through my own house, finding it better. Over and over. Like the place was healing itself while I was out working. I'd been alone in there 4 years, and I want to be honest with you about what alone does. It's not sadness. Sadness would be easier. Sadness at least has a shape. It's that you stop repairing things. Not because you're lazy. Because there's no reason. A dripping faucet doesn't bother anybody. A bad step is only a bad step if somebody else might use it. You don't decay. You just stop maintaining. And then one day you look up and every single thing in your house is almost broken. And so are you. And you didn't even notice it happening. She fixed 12 things in 6 weeks. I counted. God help me, I counted. We didn't talk much at first. Part of that was the work. I was feeding, and we were shipping late, and the days were down to 9 hours of light. Part of it was that neither of us knew how, so we started leaving notes. I don't remember deciding to. I think the first one was practical. I was gone before she woke on a Tuesday and left a note by the coffee pot that said, back around 6, don't answer the landline. And when I came in that night there was one under it. In that handwriting that leans hard right. Nobody called. Chili on the stove. The mare's favoring her offhind. I'd look at it. She was right about the mare too. That's how it went. 6 weeks of 2 people who could not say a word to each other's face, having an entire conversation on the kitchen table. Wires up on the east fence. Coffee's low. Used the last of it. Found more in the cellar. It's old, but it's coffee. Cellar steps are rotten. Don't use them. I fixed the cellar steps. I have that one. It's in a book upstairs. 4 words. And somewhere in the third week, they started changing. Saw an owl on the corral post at 5. Big one. Thought you'd want to know. I did want to know, because here's what a note is. A note is a thing you can say to somebody without having to watch their face while they read it. And for two people who'd been carrying 4 years of unsaid things, that turned out to be the only door either of us could get through. I'd write something on a piece of paper at 10 at night and go up to bed, and lie there knowing she'd read it in the morning while I was already out feeding, and there was a kind of terrible peace in it. Thanksgiving. It snowed. Not a storm. The quiet kind. Straight down. No wind. That lays 4 inches on the world and makes everything sound like it's wrapped in a blanket. She cooked. I split wood, and at about 4 in the afternoon, we ended up on the porch, with the last of the light going purple across the snow, and the mountains standing up out there, and June said, out of nowhere, I need to say something, and I need you not to look at me while I say it. So I looked at the mountains. When I signed that quitclaim, she said, I was waiting for you to stop me. The whole world went very still. I know, I said. You know? June, I've thought about those 4 seconds every day for 4 years. My voice came out rough. I know exactly what I did. I sat there like a fence post and let you think it was easy for me. Why? It came out of her cracked, Wade, why? 1 sentence. You could have said 1 sentence. And this is the hardest thing I've ever had to say to another human being. So I'm going to say it here the way I said it there. Because if I'd opened my mouth in that office, I'd have come apart in front of a lawyer and a notary, and you. I kept my eyes on those mountains. And I had it in my head that if I did that, if you saw me break, you'd have gone through with it anyway. Because you're the stubbornest person God ever made. And then you'd have had to carry my pieces on top of your mother's and your own. And I couldn't do that to you. Silence. So I held it in, I said. I held it in, and I let you walk out of there thinking I could take it. And that's the only thing in my entire life I would go back and change. She was crying. I could hear it, and I did not look, because she'd asked me not to. I thought you didn't fight for me, she said. I fought for you for 11 months. I know that now. I sat in 3 lawyers' offices. I know, Wade. She wiped her face with the heel of her hand. But then it came down to 1 room and 1 piece of paper, and you went quiet. And that's the room I've been living in for 4 years. I turned around. She was standing there in my coat with snow in her hair, 36 years old, and I said the thing 4 years too late. You didn't have to sign that. Her face folded. I'd have sold every head, I said. I'd have leased the grass and welded pipe in North Dakota till I was 50. I'd have handed Roy Calloway the deed with a bow on it. June, I would have given away every acre my grandfather ever put his hands on before I'd have let you walk out that door. And I should have said it in that room, out loud, in front of everybody. And I didn't. And I've been standing in that room ever since, too. She came across that porch and put her forehead against my chest. She didn't put her arms around me. I didn't put mine around her. We just stood there in the snow. An ex-husband and an ex-wife, 4 years late, while the light went out of the sky. And after a while she said, into my shirt, I never changed my name. I noticed. Everybody asked me why. The bank, the DMV, the lady at the courthouse. She laughed, wet and shaky. I told them it was too much paperwork. Was it? Wade, she said. It's 1 form. December came in hard. We started planning, because you can only sit with a thing so long before you have to do something about it. And by then, that envelope had been read at that kitchen table more times than the Bible. Here's what we had. We had an assignment agreement dated 4 years back, which proved Roy Calloway had owned June's debt before our divorce, which by itself proves nothing illegal. Buying debt is legal. Not telling somebody is rude, not criminal. But then June, who did the books for that man for 3 years, who knows his filing system better than he does, started remembering things. The interest rate, she said one night, with about 9 pieces of paper spread out under the kitchen light. Wade, look at this. What he's been charging me is 18%. Is that legal? On a purchased medical debt in Montana? She tapped it. 10. The cap is 10. He's been running 18 on me for 4 years and I never questioned it because I was too scared to add it up. I sat down. How much? If it's been compounding wrong since the day he bought it. She ran the numbers 3 times. Her hands were steady by the 3rd. Wade, My balance today should be 61,000. He's been billing me 158. $97,000. Manufactured. Out of nothing. Out of arithmetic. That's not a mistake, I said. No, she said. That's a leash. And that's when I called Curtis Oles. Curtis and I sat next to each other from second grade through graduation. He went to law school in Missoula, and everybody figured he'd stay gone, and instead, he came back and hung a shingle in Sheridan, and spends about half his year on water rights. He drove out on the 12th of December, parked at the washout, and walked the last mile and a half in with a briefcase, because Curtis Oles has been stubborn since he was 7. He read that envelope at my kitchen table for 40 minutes, without saying one word. Then he took his glasses off. June, he said, do you have the payment records? All 4 years? Every one. I made them myself. And the original admission contract? With the guarantee clause? In a box in Buffalo. Curtis looked at me, then at her. I want to be careful here, he said, because I don't ever want to promise anybody something in a kitchen. But, he tapped the assignment. The rate's a problem for him. That's a straight statutory violation, and it's 4 years deep, and in this state, that opens him up to a lot more than a refund. Meaning what? I said. Meaning if the numbers hold, he doesn't just have to give it back. Curtis put his glasses on. He may lose the ability to collect any of it, and that's before we get to the part where a bank president bought his employee's personal debt without disclosing it, and then proposed marriage to her while holding it. Nobody said anything. What do you call that? June said quietly. In front of a jury? Curtis said. I'd call it coercion, and I'd let them decide what to call it after that. We sat there in that kitchen, with the snow ticking on the window. Curtis, June said, I'm not a rich woman. I'm not any kind of woman with money. June Ballard, Curtis said, packing up his briefcase. I've known Wade since we were both eating paste. Send me the box from Buffalo. And don't say another word to me about money. He walked out to the washout in the dark with a flashlight in his teeth. And that would have been the end of a real nice month, except for what happened on the 19th. I was in the barn, mid-morning, cold and blue, snow squeaking underfoot, and I heard an engine. Not the county. The county was still 4 miles out with a grader and no urgency. This was something coming up the creek road from the south, off the old Reese place, through a gate that has a chain on it, across a bridge that has held for 60 years, and a no trespassing sign my father wired to it in 1994. I came out of that barn wiping my hands. 2 trucks, then a third. The lead one came up my drive at about 15 miles an hour, easy as Sunday, and stopped 40 feet from my porch. And the man who got out of it was 62 years old, with silver hair under a good hat and a canvas coat that had never been worked in. He looked at my house. He looked at my barn. He looked at the mountains like he was appraising them. And then Roy Calloway smiled at me, warm, genuine, the smile of a man greeting a nephew, and said, Wade, it's been too long. Roy, I said. I didn't wipe my hands again. I didn't move toward him. I stood right where I was, 40 feet out from my own porch, with a barn behind me and 300 acres under my boots that my grandfather bought with money he made shoeing horses. You came up the Reese Road, I said. Gate was open. Gate has a chain on it. He smiled like I'd told him a joke. Wade, we're not going to do this over a gate. And that right there, that's the man. 62 years of never once being told no, in a way that stuck. He didn't come up my drive like a trespasser. He came up it like a landlord. Cold out here, he said. You going to invite me in? No. That landed. Just for a second. Something flickered behind the smile and went back under. The second truck door opened, and Del Reese got out. And then 2 more men I half knew, and they stood by their trucks, with their hands in their coat pockets, the way men do when they've been brought somewhere and haven't been told what for. I want you to notice something. Nobody had a weapon. Nobody raised a voice. This is not that kind of story. And Roy Calloway was not that kind of man. He was worse. He was a man who'd never needed one, because he'd spent 40 years making sure that everybody who might ever stand in his way already owed him something. I'm going to speak plain, he said, because I respect you. June's here. Yep, he nodded slowly, like I'd confirmed a weather report. She's not well, Wade. There it was. She's had a hard 4 years, he went on, and his voice went gentle, and I promise you, that gentleness was the most frightening thing on my property that morning. Her mother, the money, the divorce. She's been under a strain that would break most people. And I think what happened on the 19th of October was a woman who finally cracked and ran, and I don't hold it against her. Not one bit. I want you to hear that from me. You holding anything against me? Not yet. And he let that sit. I've known you since you were a boy, he said. I knew your father. I sat at your grandfather's funeral, so I'm going to give you the courtesy of the truth. June owes my company $158,000. That's not a threat. It's a fact, and it's on paper, and it doesn't go away because she's sitting in your kitchen. Never thought it did. Now that debt is hers alone. You made sure of that. His eyes came up, or she did, and he smiled at me. That's when I knew for certain. Not suspected. Knew. Because there is no way on God's earth for a man to say that sentence like that, unless he had watched us do it and had enjoyed watching. But a judgment is a public thing, he said. It goes in the paper. The bank records it. And once a woman's got $158,000 of public judgment on her name, she doesn't rent an apartment, she doesn't finance a car, she doesn't get hired to touch anybody's books ever again in this state. He spread his hands. Reasonable. Warm. I don't want that for her. I've been carrying that account 4 years, and never filed on it once. Ask her if I've ever once been unkind. That your pitch? My pitch, he said, is that she comes home, we put this behind us, and the account gets closed out on the day of the wedding. Every dollar. Gone. He looked at the house, and you and I go on being neighbors, and the Ballard place stays the Ballard place, and nobody ever has to look at a courtroom. There it was. Everything he'd built in 40 years, distilled into one sentence, offered on my own gravel with a smile on it. Give her back and keep your land. And I want to tell you what went through me right then. Because it wasn't rage. Rage would have been simple. It was recognition. Because that is the same offer he'd made her mother. Same shape. Same gentleness. Kindness with a hook in it, handed to somebody at the exact worst moment of their life. And every one of us, Delia, June, me, had reached out and taken it, because it looked like help. That's how it works. It never looks like a trap when it's being handed to you. It looks like the only kind hand in the room. Roy, I said, I'm going to ask you one question, and I want you to think about how you answer it, because it's the last easy one you're going to get today. He waited. When did you buy her debt? Nothing moved in his face. Nothing at all. Which told me everything. Because an innocent man's face moves. An innocent man frowns, or squints, or says what? Roy Calloway's face just went perfectly, professionally still, the stillness of a man reaching for a folder in his head. Last winter, he said. Say it again. Wade, say the month. I don't see what. The month, Roy. And behind me, the screen door opened. I didn't turn around, I heard it. The specific complaint that door has made since before I was born, the sound of my whole childhood, and I watched Roy Calloway's face instead, because I wanted to see it. I watched his eyes come up over my shoulder, and I watched them change. June came down those steps, bad foot and all. She was wearing my coat, and a pair of boots, 2 sizes too big, and her hair was pulled back, and she had no makeup on. And she had not slept more than 5 hours a night in 6 weeks. She had never looked less like a bride. She had never looked more like a woman. She came down and stood beside me, not behind me, beside me. And I want that remembered. And she said, March. 4 years ago. Roy Calloway didn't say anything. You bought it on the 9th of March, she said. From Willow Bend. 22 cents on the dollar. $31,000, Roy. That's what you paid for it. It's on the assignment. And 3 weeks later I sat in a lawyer's office in Sheridan and signed my marriage away to keep that debt off this land. The wind came across the yard and moved the snow around in little curls. And a month after that, she said, we came to your bank. Both of us. And we sat in your office and told you the whole thing. And you told us you were sorry. Del Reese, over by the trucks, turned his head. Just slightly. Just enough. I saw it, and Roy didn't, and that was the beginning of the end, right there. June, Roy said. That's not. Don't, her voice cut. Don't say that's not how it happened, because I have the paper, and it's not in this house, so don't get any ideas about that either. I don't know what you think you have. I have the assignment agreement with your signature, and a notary stamp. She held up one finger. I have 4 years of payment records that I made myself, on your dealership system, under my login. 2. I have the original Willow Bend admission contract with the guarantee clause I signed in 9 minutes, while my mother screamed for me down a hallway. 3. And, she said, I have arithmetic. Roy went very still. 18%, June said. You've been running 18% on a purchased medical account in a state where the cap is 10, for 4 years. Compounding. Nothing. My balance should be $61,000, Roy. You've been billing me $158. You invented $97,000 of debt on a woman who did your books, and then you proposed to her in front of 90 people, and the only thing you ever actually asked her for, her voice cracked, she let it, she kept going, was to change her name. And here's the thing that came out of her next. The thing I didn't know was in her. The thing I will hear until I die. You didn't want the ranch, she said. You wanted the proof gone. You wanted my name off this family. Because as long as I was a Ballard, there was somebody in this county who'd stand up when you finally filed. And you knew it. You've known it for 4 years. You knew Wade would burn his whole life down for me. She turned and looked at me. So did I, she said. I just needed 4 years and a washed-out road to believe it. Nobody moved. Then Del Reese said, from over by the trucks, Mr. Calloway. Roy didn't turn around. Mr. Calloway, is that true? Get in the truck, Del. My mother's at Willow Bend. The whole yard went silent. Since June, Del said. His voice had gone strange and thin. I signed the papers. Same as her. Nobody told me what was in 'em. And that right there, was the sound of 40 years coming apart. Not a gunshot, not a fistfight. One man in a cold yard finding out that the thing he thought was only happening to somebody else had his own signature on it. The second man by the trucks got in and shut his door. Not to leave, just to be out of it. And then I heard something out on the county road. An engine. Then another. Curtis Oles's Bronco came up my drive first, because Curtis had been watching that washout for 6 days waiting for the county to lay the last of the fill, and the county had finished it Tuesday. Behind him, Tom Rivas from the Henderson place. Behind him, both Harlow brothers in one truck. Behind them, a Suburban with Marlene Cotter driving it, who has run the co-op counter for 29 years, and who had watched me load fence wire on a cold Tuesday in October, and had said absolutely nothing to anybody, ever, about anything. 6 vehicles. Then 8. They didn't say a word. They didn't block anything. They just came up my drive and parked in a loose line along the fence and got out and stood there with their hands in their pockets, in the cold, doing nothing at all. That's the part I still can't talk about without stopping, because that's what a community actually is. It isn't a mob. It's a bunch of people who owed a bank money and were scared of that bank, and who came anyway, and who stood in the snow with nothing in their hands, so that a man would have to look at them while he did what he came to do. Curtis walked up. Briefcase. Roy, he said, pleasant as church. You're a hard man to serve. I've had this in my truck for 2 weeks. He held out an envelope. Roy Calloway looked at that envelope for a long moment. Then he took it, because there was nothing else to do, and Curtis said, complaints filed in Sheridan County, usury, 4 counts, unfair trade practices, and a demand for accounting on every consumer account Calloway Holdings has purchased in the last 6 years. He smiled. That last one's going to take you a while. This is nothing, Roy said, but his voice had changed. That's the thing about a man whose whole power is other people's belief. You can't take it from him. He just runs out, like a tap. You've got no money in this fight, he said to June. You've got no money for a lawyer. You've got no money for an expert. You've got, Roy, Marlene Cotter said, from over by the fence. Hush. And he did. 62 years old, 4,000 acres, the bank on the corner with his name in the stone, and a woman who works a co-op counter told him to hush in a stranger's yard. And he did. He looked around at all of them, every face, and he understood what June had understood on that porch in the snow, that the thing he'd built didn't belong to him. It was made of other people, and other people can put a thing down. He got in his truck. Del Reese did not get in with him. Del stood in my yard with his hat in his hands and waited until the trucks were gone down the creek road. And then he said, to nobody in particular, I got to go call my sister. The lawsuit took 14 months. I'm not going to spend your time on it, because lawsuits are boring. And because the truth is, it never went to a jury. It never got close. Curtis's demand for a full accounting turned up 19 other purchased accounts. 19. Every single one of them, a person in that county who'd signed something at the worst hour of their life. A nursing home, a hospital, an equipment note after a bad year. 14 of the 19 had rates over the cap. Roy Calloway settled in the spring. He didn't apologize, because men like that don't. And the settlement had a clause in it that meant he never had to. June's debt was declared void. Not reduced. Void, because in Montana, if you charge a rate like that, you can lose the right to collect the principal at all. 0. She got a certified letter on a Tuesday in April, and she read it standing at the mailbox, and she came back up that drive walking real slow, and when she got to the porch she handed it to me and sat down on the third step. The one she'd fixed. Say it out loud, she said. I need to hear it from somebody else. You don't owe anybody anything. She put her face in her hands, and she cried the way you cry when a thing you've carried since you were 33 finally gets set down. And I sat next to her on that step, and I didn't say one word, because there wasn't one that would have helped. The bank was sold in September. The new owners kept 2 tellers and changed the name on the stone. Roy Calloway moved to Arizona. I hear he golfs. We got married again on a Saturday in May. Not a big thing. 51 people at the little church in Marlow, the one with the crooked bell tower. Curtis stood up with me. Marlene Cotter did the flowers out of her own garden because she said she'd be damned if June Ballard was going to walk down an aisle behind flowers a florist picked. Del Reese came, sat in the back, cried harder than anybody, and nobody said a thing about it. June wore a plain blue dress, not white. She was very clear about that. I already did the white one, she said. It was the worst day of my life. I'm not doing that twice. She walked down that aisle on a foot that still had a scar across the heel, and she looked at me standing up front, and I looked at her, and I thought about a tarp in the back of a truck. We didn't write vows. Neither of us can talk in front of people. But when the pastor got to the part about, do you take this woman, I said it too loud, and about a half-second early, and everybody laughed, and June put her hand over her mouth and closed her eyes. Afterward, out in the churchyard with the wind coming and everybody eating pie off paper plates, she found me standing by the truck. The same truck, the cracked tail light and everything. You never fixed it, she said. Nope. 4 years. 6 now. She ran her thumb along the crack. Why? And I told her the truth, which I'd never told anybody. Because it was the last thing you did to this place, I said. Everything else I could keep. The dresser, the coffee cup, the recipe card. But that was the last mark you made, and if I fixed it, that was it. That was the last of you gone off my property. She stood there for a long time. Then she said, Wade, that's the saddest thing I've ever heard in my life. I know it. Fix the tail light? Yes, ma'am. And she started laughing, and then she was crying, and then we were both standing in a churchyard in Marlow, Montana, holding on to each other in front of 51 people, and I did not care even a little bit. We fixed it that fall. Well, she fixed it. Came out to the shop one Saturday, popped the lens, put the new one in, and never said a word about it. Because that is who she is. I found it done. Now here's what I want you to take with you, and then I'll let you go. June asked me to pretend. She said it under a tarp with blood in her shoe and 3 trucks on Main Street. Pretend I'm your wife, just until we're out of town. And I said the word wife to Del Reese, and it came out of me like breathing. But I never pretended anything. Not once. Not 1 minute of it. Not when I said it at the 4-way. Not when I carried her up those steps. Not when I cleaned that foot on the mudroom floor, or left a note by the coffee pot, or stood in the yard between her and a man who owned half the county. I wasn't pretending to be her husband. I'd just never stopped being one. The paper said we were divorced. The paper was true. The paper was signed and stamped and filed, and it was also the biggest lie either of us ever told. And we told it for 4 years to a courthouse, a bank, a county, and mostly to ourselves. Here's what nobody tells you. Some marriages don't die. They get interrupted. They get put down in a hurry by two people trying to save each other, and then those two people spend years apologizing to the air, each one believing they were the only one who couldn't let go. 4 years, we lived 41 miles apart. 4 years, she kept my name and told the DMV it was too much paperwork. 4 years, I kept a dresser full of her clothes and a broken taillight and a text I never sent. And neither one of us ever knew, because the one sentence that would have fixed it was the one sentence we were each too busy protecting the other person to say. So here's my question for you, and I want you to sit with it, because I think it matters more than the whole story I just told you. Is there a sentence you have never said out loud to your husband, your wife, your mother, your child, your oldest friend, because you decided, all on your own, that saying it would hurt them? And what if they've been sitting on the other side of that same silence for years, protecting you from the exact same words? Silence feels like kindness. That's the trap. It feels generous, it feels strong, it feels like love. But silence is not love. Silence is just love that never got delivered. Say it, while there's somebody in the room to hear it. If this story reached you today, if there's somebody you thought about while you were listening, do me a favor and leave a like, and tell me in the comments, what's the sentence you almost said? And if you haven't already, tap that notification bell. Turn it on, because I've got more of these coming, and I'd hate for you to miss the next one. Until then, take care of each other, and don't wait 4 years to say the thing.